Let's begin. Number 1. The cousin marriage that shocked Europe. Imagine your wedding day being less about love and more about geopolitics, and your bride also happens to be your cousin. Welcome to the world of William III of Orange. In 1677, William married Mary Stuart, his first cousin, and the daughter of the Duke of York, the future James II of England. It wasn't just a family gathering, it was Europe's version of a horror story, dynastic inbreeding mixed with high-stakes politics. This marriage wasn't about affection, it was a chess move. England needed allies against Catholic France, and William needed legitimacy in England. By marrying Mary, he wasn't just adding a new branch to the family tree, he was welding it shut. Bloodlines intertwined so tightly you'd think the royal family was auditioning for a medical textbook on hereditary risks. Mary was only 15, William 27. You don't have to imagine the awkwardness. Contemporary accounts say Mary wept through the ceremony. It's hard to celebrate when your wedding feels like a hostage negotiation disguised as a coronation rehearsal. The union reinforced the Protestant cause, but for Mary, it also meant her life was dictated by William's ironclad ambitions. And here's the historical takeaway. Royal marriages weren't romantic. They were insurance policies, alliances, and weapons rolled into one. This was less Romeo and Juliet, more Game of Thrones, with a much higher chance of gout. In the end, that cousin marriage set up one of the most dramatic successions in English history. William wasn't just marrying Mary, he was marrying the English throne. Now picture yourself as a child. Your father dies before you're born, your mother follows when you're still a boy, and suddenly the fate of nations rests on your shoulders. That was William's early life. Born in 1650, he was posthumously fatherless. His father, William II of Orange, had died just 8 days before his birth. Talk about starting life with a plot twist Shakespeare would have envied. Raised in the shadow of loss, William grew into a figure defined by both resilience and suspicion. The Dutch States General, wary of monarchy, stripped him of princely power during his childhood. Basically, he was born a prince, then demoted to a glorified mascot. His life was one long apprenticeship in survival. But William had something most royals lacked: iron determination. He clawed his way back into Dutch politics, eventually becoming Stadtholder of Holland. By his 20s, he was Europe's unlikely underdog, the frail, asthmatic prince who refused to bow to Louis XIV's seemingly unstoppable France. It was David versus Goliath, except David was wheezing between battles. Historically, his rise shows the double-edged sword of orphan monarchs. On the one hand, their tragedies built empathy and hardened resolve. On the other, it fueled paranoia. William trusted few, and his life became one long series of cautious, calculated risks. From cradle to crown, William's story was never gentle. It was about clawing power from the jaws of tragedy. And it made him perfectly prepared for the violent drama of English succession. Picture England in the 1680s, a Protestant nation with a Catholic king. James II, William's uncle and father-in-law, was openly Catholic in a country that still had nightmares about Bloody Mary. The result? England felt like it was sitting on a powder keg, and every papal decree from Rome was the spark. Enter William, Protestant hero in shining, slightly rusted armor. When James II produced a male heir in 1688, the nightmare scenario came true, the prospect of a Catholic dynasty. England's political elite panicked and sent William a desperate invitation. It was the world's most awkward family letter. "Hey nephew, also son-in-law, want to invade us and maybe depose your father-in-law?" William landed in England with 15,000 troops. James's army? They melted away like snow in the sun. Even James's own daughter, Mary, William's wife, sided with William. Talk about family betrayal at maximum settings. Imagine overthrowing your dad so your husband can take his crown. Therapy bills for that family would bankrupt a small kingdom. The Glorious Revolution was glorified precisely because it was relatively bloodless. But don't be fooled, it was still a coup. Basically, England staged a hostile corporate takeover. James II was ousted, and William and Mary became joint CEOs of the monarchy. The takeaway? Religion wasn't just about faith, it was about power. William became the Protestant savior, the man who kept England from going Catholic, and in doing so, rewrote the monarchy itself. Number 4, joint rule, a marriage of crowns. Imagine running a country with your spouse. Now imagine that spouse is also your cousin. That was William and Mary's setup after the Glorious Revolution. In 1689, Parliament crowned them joint monarchs. It wasn't just ceremonial. Mary wasn't a queen consort, she was queen regnant, ruling in her own right. William wasn't king through Mary, but alongside her. England had basically hired a royal power couple to keep the Catholic threat at bay. Of course, joint rule sounds nice on paper. In practice, it was awkward. Mary was born and raised in England, daughter of the deposed James II, and she had natural legitimacy. William was the foreign import, Dutch to his core, with a stiff manner and terrible English. He needed her popularity to survive politically, but he refused to let her overshadow him. When William was abroad fighting wars, as he often was, Mary effectively ruled alone, and she proved surprisingly competent. But William, he didn't love the idea of being seen as her second. This wasn't exactly couple goals. Their marriage was dutiful, not passionate, and their rule reflected that. Pragmatic, united in public, frosty in private. The irony? Parliament created this two-monarch solution to prevent tyranny. But really, it just revealed how fragile monarchy was. If one partner failed, the whole thing crumbled. Thankfully for England, both William and Mary took their roles seriously, even if their personal dynamic was as cold as a drafty castle corridor. The historical lesson: when your government structure looks like a bad group project, you're asking for drama. Number 5, war, and more war. If you thought William would spend his reign sipping tea and practicing royal small talk, think again. This was a man obsessed with war. From the moment he landed in England, his real enemy wasn't James II. It was Louis XIV of France. For William, Louis was the ultimate villain, the Catholic Sun King who wanted to dominate Europe. William devoted his entire life to stopping him. As king, he dragged England into endless wars against France. The 9 Years' War, the War of the Grand Alliance, and later the War of the Spanish Succession. Basically, if there was a European conflict, William was at the center, like an exhausted referee who also had asthma. Here's the kicker: England wasn't thrilled about it. War meant higher taxes, more debt, and drained resources. The English Parliament started pushing back, demanding limits on royal spending and more control over military budgets. William's warmongering accidentally fueled the rise of parliamentary power. Ironically, the king who thought he was saving monarchy from Catholic tyranny ended up strengthening England's path toward constitutional government. For William, war was survival. For England, war was transformation. You could argue his obsession with fighting France created modern Britain, financially disciplined, parliamentary checked, and permanently suspicious of continental power. Takeaway? William fought wars to preserve his crown, but those very wars shifted real power toward Parliament. Kings could lead armies, but Parliament would hold the purse strings. Number 6, Mary's death and William's lonely throne. Now imagine your one true political partner, your cousin, your wife, your co-monarch dies suddenly. In 1694, Mary contracted smallpox and passed away at just 32. For William, who was already prone to bouts of coldness and melancholy, it was devastating. He reportedly broke down at her bedside, unable to face the reality of ruling alone. But grief didn't erase the politics. With Mary gone, William had to govern solo, and it exposed how unpopular he really was. Mary had been beloved, gracious, English, and approachable. William was cold, foreign, and more comfortable on a battlefield than at a banquet. Without her, the monarchy looked fragile again. The symbolism was brutal. Joint rule had been designed as a Protestant partnership to stabilize the crown. Now half that partnership was gone. William kept going, clinging to his mission of opposing France, but the personal cost was enormous. He lost not only his wife, but the public goodwill she carried. There's something haunting here. William, the orphan king who had risen from tragedy, was once again alone. Except this time, instead of childhood loss, it was adulthood's cruel reminder that even kings can't command life or death. Number 7. Plots, assassins, and the Jacobite menace. Being king in the late 1600s wasn't a 9-to-5 job. It was more like living in a permanent horror movie where the killer never stops coming back. William faced endless assassination plots, most of them cooked up by Jacobites, supporters of the exiled James II. The most infamous was the 1696 Jacobite assassination plot. The plan was straight out of a grim medieval script. Ambush William's carriage as he returned from a hunting trip, overwhelm his guards, and cut him down in the road. Dozens of conspirators were involved, and when the scheme was uncovered, England went into shock. This wasn't politics as usual, this was raw survival. William, already paranoid by nature, now lived in a constant state of suspicion. He traveled with armed escorts, tightened security, and leaned even harder on his secret intelligence network. The irony? These assassination attempts, meant to topple him, only reinforced his control. Parliament rallied around him, and his enemies were painted as bloodthirsty villains. But the threat never disappeared. Every time a plot was uncovered, the crown trembled. For William, survival was a daily battle, not just against France or Parliament, but against daggers in the dark. The takeaway: being king wasn't about golden crowns or glittering balls. It was about dodging death, year after year, and wondering which smiling courtier might be hiding a blade. Number 8. William the Unloved King. Here's the thing. William was respected but rarely loved. To many Englishmen, he was still the awkward Dutchman who spoke poor English and seemed permanently allergic to joy. His court was austere, his manners stiff, and his charm level somewhere between wet parchment and unbuttered toast. Mary had softened his image, but after her death, the cracks showed. Parliament tolerated him because he was useful against France, but the English people never truly embraced him. He was the anti-charisma king, brilliant militarily, but terrible at winning hearts. And yet his unpopularity worked in a strange way. It forced him to rely on Parliament more than previous monarchs, accelerating the constitutional shift of England. In a bizarre twist, his inability to charm actually pushed the monarchy into modernity. He couldn't rule like a divine right king because no one would let him. You could almost say William III stumbled his way into progress. Not because he was a visionary reformer, but because his cold personality left him no choice. Sometimes history doesn't move forward because of grand plans. It lurches forward because the king has the charisma of a soggy biscuit. Number 9. A fall from a horse, a fall from power. For a man who had spent his life surviving wars, plots, and political storms, William's end was almost darkly comedic. In 1702, while riding his horse Sorrel at Hampton Court, the animal stumbled on a molehill. William was thrown, breaking his collarbone. The injury led to complications, and within weeks, he was dead at age 51. That's right. The king who had battled Louis XIV, defied assassins, and seized the English throne was ultimately undone by a mole. Jacobites toasted the news, calling the mole the little gentleman in black velvet, celebrating the tiny creature as the true slayer of William III. You can't make this stuff up. Sometimes history has a wicked sense of irony. His death left no heirs. Mary had borne no children. The throne passed to Mary's sister Anne, starting yet another turbulent chapter in the Stuart saga. But William's legacy remained. He had secured Protestant succession, curbed absolute monarchy, and permanently tied England to the European balance of power. The lesson? History doesn't care how mighty you are. It'll let you play king on the stage of Europe, then trip you over a molehill when the curtain falls. Number 10. The legacy of a reluctant hero. William III wasn't the kind of king who inspired ballads or love stories. He wasn't glamorous, he wasn't magnetic, and he wasn't adored, but he was necessary. His marriage to Mary stitched England to Protestant Europe, his wars against France kept the Sun King in check, and his reign gave Parliament more teeth than ever before. In short, he helped build modern Britain, even if he never smiled doing it. Think about it. Without William, England might have drifted toward Catholic monarchy under James II's heirs. Without William's wars, France could have dominated Europe unchecked. Without William's dependence on Parliament, the monarchy might never have evolved into the constitutional system we know today. But here's the twist. None of this was glamorous. William's reign was defined by duty, not charisma, survival, not triumph. He was the king who married his cousin to gain legitimacy, who ruled with his wife because Parliament demanded it, who fought wars he couldn't afford, and who died because of a molehill. He was an accidental reformer, a reluctant hero, a man who didn't choose glory but had it forced upon him by history. And maybe that's why his story matters. Not all rulers are loved. Some are simply endured. But in enduring William, England was reshaped forever. Basically, William saved the monarchy, reformed Parliament, and checked the Sun King, only to be killed by a mole. Subscribe before history trips you up the same way.